Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us in this webinar on Make Test Metrics Work For You by Robin Goldsmith. I'm pleased to have Robin with us this morning. Robin has been actually working with IIST for a long time, since the inception of IIST back in 1999. He's one of the senior instructors, but also Robin has been in the field of software engineering, software management, quality management, quality assurance, and many other fields that I would not have much time to list here in this webinar. He's been in the field for as long as I have been, and maybe even longer, because when I got into the field maybe 35, 40 years ago, he was already there before me. We're very grateful to have Robin with us, sharing his experience in this topic, and be with us to also to answer your questions. Whenever you have questions, you will be able to ask those questions through the webinar. This webinar is hosted by the International Institute for Software Testing, the leader in education-based certifications and different topics. IIST has about 12 different types of certifications, but most importantly, IIST has the largest list of software testing and quality assurance courses in the world. We have over 100 courses. They're all listed there on the website. You could feel free to visit us there. These courses are available either as online self-paced or online interactive, or even available to be scheduled for your team, for your group at your company site, or even as a live interactive courses. I guess I need to stop doing my marketing and sales pitch here, and welcome Robin Goldsmith in this webinar, and so that we can enjoy his experience. Robin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Magdi. Welcome, everybody. Some of you have seen this before. I'm still the same person. I'm not going to bore you with all this. Just point out that as Magdi indicated, I actually used to have real jobs before I became a consultant, and actually I worked for some major consulting firms as well. Some of the related things is I've been fortunate to be a member of 3 IEEE standards working groups. 829 is relevant to software testing. 730 is software quality assurance, and currently I'm on the P41062 working group dealing with software acquisition. Glad to talk to you offline about any of those. Been a subject expert for the IIBA Babcock Business Analysis Body of Knowledge version 2, search software qualities, techtarget.com website. Got a book called Discovering Real Business Requirements for Software Project Success, and a forthcoming book that, as I say, I'm starting to start. Now, today's webinar is a preview for a full day course called Test Process Measurement and Improvement that will be presented live online on Wednesday, September 29th. Okay. And it's one of 4 courses that I'll be presenting that week that together, if you take the related certification exam for each course, pass all 4 of those, then you earn the Certified Software Test Lead, CSTL certification. You may find that valuable. So we're doing a series of webinars, as some of you are aware. Each one of them is related to one of those 4 courses. Now, I do want to point out that while getting certifications are valuable, each of the courses provides considerable content and value by itself. So don't hesitate to register for an individual one if that's a topic that's of interest to you, but you're not interested in the certification. But realize that the certification is like the icing on the cake. And if you're not interested in or able to register for the live courses, realize that we've got a number of my courses that are recorded, and 4 of them are the ones that are for the Certified Software Test Lead certification. But you get the opportunity in a live course to get interaction and feedback and shape the class in a way that you don't get with the more convenient, sometimes on-demand courses. So what I would like you to do, if you would, is put into the questions box what your issues or objectives are for today. I'm going to ask Magdi to keep an eye on that and share with us. Anybody has any particular reasons why you are attending today, please let us know, because that's going to help me shape my presentation, hopefully give ways to relate what we're presenting to your particular interests and concerns, and make this more personal for each of you. But I can't do that if you don't share with me, why it is that you're attending, what it is that you hope to get out of it. So I'm going to keep chattering there for another minute. If anybody enters something, I know it takes a little while for people to type things. I can appreciate that. Magdi, anything showing up yet?
Not yet. Nothing yet. I'm watching here.
Okay. Magdi, you've been known to offer some ideas of your own, and anything that you'd think would be important to get out of today's topic?
Well, when it comes to the topic of measurements and metrics, as you know very well, Robin, and everyone else who deals with this topic knows, people are having a problem with measurements because they're afraid that measurements will reflect something about their performance, and they're thinking that when we measure, we're measuring people performance as opposed to measuring the process. So I know it's a long topic. It's a problem that people have resistance to measurements, and not only resistance, but it's a challenge for management or anyone to start doing measurements because of the fear there. However, we also have a question from someone here. It says, what are the test metrics in Agile?
What are test metrics in Agile? Excellent question. And if anybody has any thoughts on that, please also put them in the questions box. Good. And we'll try to relate some of this to Agile. But it'll be interesting to see what your experiences are with those. I'm sure that many of you attending are involved with Agile projects, and I think it's an important question whether and what test metrics are your Agile projects paying attention to, if any. Okay, good. Any other questions there, Magni?
Nope, not.
Okay. Well, let me share with you what I see as the objectives for today, and let's see if these are understandable and seem reasonable, and possibly fit with what you've been saying. So, as Magdi said, we're concerned with the testing process and how your real testing process, and some of you attended sessions last week and the week before and realized that what our real process is not always what people are paying attention to or even aware of, but that your testing process is what determines the effectiveness and efficiency of your testing. And that measurements, therefore, are largely measures of your process, or measures that are going to be useful and helpful are measures of your process, and measuring your processes appropriately is a real challenge. Magdi mentioned a couple of the issues, including using the measurements punitively. And
Hey
one of
guys,
the other things,
the webinar is, sorry, ignore.
Okay, so one of the other things that tends to be a problem is that people sometimes can think of more measurements than are actually helpful, and that the activities of measurement can actually get in your way. And so part of using measurements effectively is zeroing in on a critical few measures that help you get the needed quality and keep getting the needed quality. And those are two important things. Doing it initially and continuing it are two important and not quite the same things. So if you would, please put into the questions box what you're currently measuring about testing and how those measures are used and how well it is working for you, why or why not. So if you would, please share with us in the questions box, and once again, we'll let Magdi keep an eye on that. So let's find out what people are currently measuring. And by the way, if you are involved with Agile, let us know that, because this will tie back to the question of what kind of measures people are using in Agile. And then these other critical issues, what are those measures used for and how well is it working? And Magdi, if you're seeing anything there, please share them. And if not, please suggest any measures that you see people use.
Someone says mostly the defects reported.
Okay. Defects reported.
Another one says my bosses are recommending mostly with the percentage of bugs compared to a number of tests run. And another one, not another one, but a continuation. How often we reopen regression testing. Another one, new features / enhancements along with the existing features testing.
Okay. New versus existing functions. Good. Anything else?
Another one, bugs reported by users versus bugs reported by the QA team.
Okay. Good. Okay, so we've got a wide variety there. Now, each of those could be a measure from agile or non-agile. You know, and we'll be talking about some of these. I'll try to remember this and get back to it as we go on. So one of the things that is important to understand is whether you are measuring the testing project, that's the particular tests that you're carrying out, or are you measuring your testing process, which goes across projects? And so what's the difference? The testing project is our immediate attention. The testing process is ultimately what's going to determine how we do testing projects. So if you are, as so many people do, you mentioned defects reported, that's generally a testing project issue, and often the reporting of defects is so that those defects then can be fixed. But people may not actually be measuring what's going on. That's so the defects are a common measure, but often they're not really measured. They're just there, and we're losing the opportunity to learn from them. Okay. Now, we use the term process. And so if you would, please put your definition of what a process is and why we care what a process is in the Q&A and or in the questions box. And you know, why do we care what a process is, and why do we care what we think a process is? What difference does it make how you define what a process is? There's a method to my madness here, and anybody offering anything on what a process is yet, Magdi?
Not yet, not yet.
Not yet. It takes a little while to type these things. I appreciate that. So people tend to use terms like process, and oftentimes they maybe haven't really thought through very well what they mean by it. And so getting clearer on our meanings is an important part of using our measurements more effectively. So a typical common definition is that a process is a set of steps or actions that should be taken to achieve a desired result. Now, I think there's a good chance that this sounds very much like what a lot of you would say a process is. And I'm going to suggest that one of the reasons that we have difficulties, including difficulties with measurements, is because we don't have a good understanding of what a process is, let alone what our specific processes are. And so a process is more than just steps or actions. It's also beliefs and customs and practices and skills and knowledge that together produce a result. Okay? And recognize that the process exists, whether or not the process is recognized, whether or not the process is intended, whether or not the process is even desirable. That is, if you get bad results, that's the outcome of a process that's producing results that you consider bad. Okay? There's a process producing them. And if you repeat your process, you will get basically the same results. Now, you can repeat a process even though you're not conscious you're doing it. You can repeat a process even though you're not intending or desiring to do it. But recognize that if you understand what your process is, then you can use that understanding to predict your results. That is, if I do that same process over again, I'm going to get basically the same results. They may or may not be desirable. Okay? Now, the process world gets more complicated because there are two types of processes. There is the real process that's actually producing our results. And very often, the real process is not recognized. And then there is the presumed process. The presumed process is what people think is producing their results. Now, very often, the presumed process is a defined process. If your process is documented, that is, by definition, a defined process. But you can have defined processes that are not documented. So, for instance, consider if you get into an elevator. We all know that when you're riding in an elevator, you face forward and you don't talk. That's part of the process related to an elevator. Okay. But it's a defined process. Everybody knows that, but it's not a documented process. Okay. So we can have a presumed process which is defined but not documented. Okay. And if you want to change your results, you need to change your process. But recognize that most people are not going to change the real process. They may not even be aware of the real process. People are going to change the presumed process, what they think is producing their results. Okay. And if the presumed process is different from the real process, so the presumed process could be the same as the real process, but often it is not. And often the presumed process is not actually producing the results that we want to change. So if you change a presumed process that is not producing our current results, changing that is unlikely to produce our desired results. In fact, it just wastes time and effort. So in order to get meaningful change, we need to change the real process. And to change the real process, we have to recognize what it is. And often that's not easy. So in the world of processes, there are a couple of terms that are commonly used. One of them is the as is or current state process. The as is or current state process is the real process that's producing our current results. The should be or future state process is the one that will presumably produce our desired results. And requirements relate to the should be process. In other words, requirements are what it is that we think will be producing our desired results. Very often, this gets complicated. Recognizing what the real process is gets complicated because of what are called silos. Some of you are familiar with silos on a farm, tall cylindrical structures that are used for storing food for animals. And Basically, if you were inside of a silo, your view of the world would be very limited. You would have no way to know what was going on outside of the silo or in the silo next to you. Very often a silo will have a very small window up at the top of the silo. Your view out that window may or may not be an accurate reflection of what's actually happening outside of the silo. It's just a small slice. That is, it's creating a presumed view of a much larger view. And so silos can create presumptions even if they're partially looking at what's really going on. And problem is that silos occur within organizations, not just on farms. And so if we are going to understand what our real process is and where changes might be made and whether those changes are in fact achieving their desired results, we need to look at the full process from the beginning to the full end result. Okay. And what we find is that the way that we measure processes is by measuring the projects that are subject to that process and then accumulating measures across projects. So our process determines how we do projects. And the projects, therefore, demonstrate the processes. And by observing and measuring common points across projects, that becomes the way to measure the process. And we need to realize that there are two different types of things that we need to be measuring. We need to be measuring results, but we also need to be measuring the actions and the beliefs and the customs and the practices and so forth that are producing the results. Okay. So both of these need to be measured, and there's a lot of folks that measure one but not the other, and consequently they end up having an out of balance situation. So the results or the outputs of our process, okay, the products and services, okay, that are produced. We need to identify the capability. How much could we accomplish? What kind of variations are occurring? We need to be measuring the functionality and the various quality aspects. And we need to realize that quality measures, the ones that we tend to measure are in terms of defects, but there can be other measures of quality that are not the same as defects. So quality is different from simply not having defects, and things like performance and usability and so forth. Now, that's part of it. So we've now started football season again, and some of you may be familiar with, they're fans of football, and you know that the main thing that a team is concerned with is the score at the end of the game. That's the output, that's the results. But if you observe what's going on during the game, the coaches are busy monitoring what's going on, what is happening in their process that is in fact leading to those results. oh, this particular lineman is continually getting pushed out of the way, and the defenders are getting through and sacking the quarterback. Oh, that's something that we need to pay attention to and then take some kind of actions to improve upon it. Okay. We need to understand what are the resources and materials and characteristics and quantities and costs and time and so forth that go into those causes of our process. What are the methods that are being used? And what about the skills and knowledge? So maybe we need to replace. Maybe we've got a running back who's not able to get through the hole in the line fast enough before the defenders close it up. Maybe we need to get a running back who's a little stronger or faster, or maybe knows how to maybe spot a better hole, things like that. Okay, so those are we need both the results and the causes of the results. Okay. And so when we look at the results and the causes of the results, then we're able to see the patterns emerge, which are our real processes. So if you would, please put in the questions box what testing results would be most important for you to measure. So now, just the results, don't worry about the causes yet. So what kind of testing results, which may or may not be what's currently being measured, but what are the testing results that would be important for you to measure? And then consider whether those are the things you are measuring. Somebody, for the prior question said that you were measuring defects. Okay, that's the obvious thing. Any other results to measure? Okay. Anybody saying anything here, Magdi?
Someone saying testing coverage.
Coverage, okay. Okay. And anything else?
No, not at this time.
Not yet. Okay. So the results, the obvious one is defects. Okay. Coverage is actually not exactly a result measure. It's in fact what's truly called a metric, because a metric puts two or more measures together. So coverage is relating to some other measure of how big something is, how many requirements you have, or design elements, or lines of code, or what have you, and measuring which of those have been addressed. So coverage is actually a metric rather than a measure, and that's fine, because ultimately we're aiming for metrics. So when we look at measures and how they relate to money, which is ultimately an important measure, we know that earlier is cheaper. That is, that when we look at where the money goes in an overall system development life cycle, that the bulk of money is spent on a system after it has gone into production. Typically anywhere from 66 to 90% of a system's total cost over its life is maintenance, changes to the system after it goes into production. Now, what people often don't understand and misunderstand is that most maintenance is not new and unpredictable. Most maintenance is finishing and fixing things that could have and should have been known, but were not. Often because requirements that were defined were wrong, or they were not defined when they could have and should have been. Okay. And when we look at errors in finished systems, typically about 2/3 of them are errors that were there in the beginning. There were errors in the design that developers typically implement with code, and the design that testers typically confirm with tests. So most of the design errors actually originate with requirements errors, but errors that are already in the design are ones that typical developers and typical testers are very unlikely to be able to catch and prevent. And the significance of this is that if there is a requirements error and it is not found until after it's been programmed, it's usually going to cost easily 10 times as much or more to fix than if the error had been caught as a requirement so that the developer didn't spend time coding it wrong or coding the wrong thing. If that requirements error and its resulting code is not detected until that code has gone into production, in other words, in maintenance, it's orders of magnitude more expensive to fix. 75, 100, 1,000 or more times as expensive to fix as if it had compared to fixing it when it was a requirement. Why is that? Because the longer that it takes between when the error occurs and when it's detected, the harder it is to figure out why it occurred. And other things are often also affected. Data may be bad, may have to be recreated. Other programs may be affected. And that's why the later that you find something, the more expensive it usually is to fix, or conversely, the earlier you find an error, typically the cheaper it is and easier it is to fix. Now, how do we know that this is true? Okay. And is it true for you? Does this happen in your world? Okay. And does your organization have routine measures that help you see these things are happening and see the extent of them and see the impact of them? Okay. So if you can share your experience on this, how you know it's true, if it is true for you, and does your organization have routine measures that show these effects, and if so, what are they? So if you can share those in the questions, that'll be helpful for everybody. Yeah. Most of the people that I encounter say, yes, this does reflect what really happens in their world. But your experience could be different, or maybe it's even more compelling. Okay. And most organizations do not have routine measures that help them see these effects. Okay. And when you don't have ways to see what's happening and see the extent of it, and especially see the impact of it, then you're much less likely to pay attention. Okay? And that's a big issue. So do we have any feedback on this, Magdi?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Anything that you can share, Magdi? Are these things that you encounter? And do you
I
find
hate
that organizations?
I hate to say this, but I lost the track of what you were talking, Robin, because I'm gonna have to tell you this, guys. I'm busy responding to people on LinkedIn who are saying this they did not receive the link to the webinar, and this webinar is
Oh,
fake. Nothing is running live. So I'm sorry, I had to go immediately and respond on
oh,
LinkedIn to the chat to kind of defend ourselves because someone said I think it is fake. So it looks like one or two
oh.
people did not receive the link. So my sincere apology to get you involved in
Okay.
this.
Well,
But
I hope that you're giving them the link and that they can indeed join
yeah,
us
I've tried
because
hard to look up their registration while we are live on
yeah.
the webinar to send them the
Okay.
link. But it just was hard to follow up with you and also try to respond in LinkedIn.
Okay,
Again, one more time,
that's
sorry.
fine. And so Magdi has just given us a very real example of a real process that's different from the presumed process because we're not expecting people to not have links. Okay. And that we don't have effective measures to identify the people that we thought we'd sent links to, in fact, received those links. Okay. Now, the good news is that there are some mechanisms here to help us become aware of this issue, but becoming aware of it kind of behind the eight ball. So, if you don't have routine measures to see issues, then it's likely that you won't be aware of what's really going on, and that's the fact. So think about your car. Your car has a gas gauge. Your car probably has some kind of an oil pressure gauge or some indicator that tells you how much oil you have left in your car. These are routine measures that help you know to go fill up with gas or have the oil changed before your car gets into trouble. Okay? We need the same types of measures in software. So some of the things that we probably want to be attentive to are the phase of development in which something is occurring. Now, our friends in the agile world will say, well, we don't have phases. We have sprints and everything occurs within a sprint. Okay. That's true, but if we break up that sprint into what the various aspects of the sprint are, it ties back to the types of phases that we have in non-agile development. And so we're not so concerned with formal demarcations between phases as so much what kind of an activity is the error occurring in. So for instance, in Agile, if the user story is wrong, okay, that's a user story definition activity or phase. Okay. In non-agile, you might call that requirements or systems analysis. Okay. If the design is wrong, okay, that also is happening in agile. Maybe not as clearly separate as in possibly other methodologies, but in fact, if you design the wrong program or design the program wrong, okay, you could code it perfectly and still end up with a problem. Much of the problems that we encounter are going to be that the coding doesn't accurately implement the design. Okay. Maybe our tests don't catch the problems. So identifying where in the process it occurs is an important instructive part of identifying causes. Okay. And what might be some attributes of coding and some attributes of testing that would be important? So, for instance, if the coding is being done, let's say, using a particular development tool, or the testing is being done using a particular testing tool, okay, those would both be characteristics that would contribute to the causes of whether we're creating and or finding defects. Okay. The cost and effort of doing the coding, the cost and effort of doing the testing. Now, those in fact are separable even within an agile methodology. Okay. Similarly, the duration. Okay. That is, activities can take longer than just their inherent effort. Okay. You can have things that take longer in clock or calendar time. Okay. And what kinds of defects are we encountering? And so how many defects? What's their nature? Is it a calculation is being done wrong, an input error, an output formatting error, readability, visibility? There's all kinds of relevant characteristics there that help us understand what our effects are and tie them back to their causes. And then, what's it costing to fix that particular issue? Okay. Because if it's not costing as much to fix it, we probably are going to pay less attention to it than if it's shutting us down, making us go back and retrace our efforts and so forth. So these are some examples, and you might share with us in the questions box attributes of the code that you might want to know about that are possibly related to the defects, attributes of the tests that are related to your ability to catch the defects or not catch them as fast as you should, and defect categories that are helpful for understanding better about what's causing your problems. So here are some examples, things that typically people know are related to our output, to our results. Okay. The size and complexity of the code, widely recognized as tightly related to the likelihood of defects. So the bigger and more complex code is, the more likely it is to have defects. The language, the platform, the environment that you're working in. These are all going to be characteristics that contribute to the quality of the code that's being produced. Somebody mentioned, is it new code or modified code? Big differences. We tend to find that modifying code, which is what happens in maintenance, tends to create a much higher incidence of defects than code that's being written for the first time. The defect density. How many defects are we actually catching relative to a measure of size of the code? And let's relate that to our prior experience. And let's relate that to our projections. So we said that if you do the same thing you did before, you're going to get basically the same results. So if we had code like this before, and we had 30 defects per 1,000 lines of code or per function point or however you might measure size, there's a pretty good chance that this code is going to have roughly the same defect density. Okay? If we're getting something different from what we project, then that's a tip-off to go look for things that are causing problems or reducing problems, such as, for instance, our various development practices. Okay, the particular methodology that we're using, both for development, like Agile or what have you. Maybe you're using my proactive testing methodologies. Okay. Look back at how good a job and how thorough requirements were defined, various business requirements and software requirements. How are we doing on user stories? What are we using use cases? How are they tying to user stories, for instance? What about our high level and physical and low level design and so forth? And what about how critical the problem is? So we can have lots of defects that don't matter a whole lot to the user or the business, and then we've got some that really matter. So think about in your own world, how do you measure incoming quality? In other words, the things that are contributing to the developer's ability to do a quality coding job. And how are you measuring outgoing quality? Not just defects, but can we categorize them in ways that are meaningful? Now, the various attributes of our tests, we also need to understand, because this is going to be a big determinant of how effective our testing is. So the breadth, how many of the requirements or features or design components or business requirements are met. Depth, how many tests versus the potential number of tests. So for instance, most folks that I'm aware of tend not to measure depth of their tests. And when you find tests that are not catching defects, it's often because important scenarios were overlooked. Okay? Maybe the various test conditions were not understood adequately. One of the issues that we continually encounter is automated versus not automated. Okay? And what people tend not to see is whether the automated tests are in fact testing the right stuff and testing it adequately. And there's a presumption if it's automated that that must be all that's needed. But of course, there's valid or positive tests and invalid or negative tests. And invariably, we tend to need many more negative tests than positive tests, but we need both. Okay? And we also need to look at how many testers do we have? What are their characteristics? Are we having people who are professional or testing specialists doing our testing? What if we're relying on business analysts to do the testing? What if we're relying on users to do the testing? What if we're relying on developers to do the testing? And what kind of specific skills and levels do each of them have? So, should we be surprised if who's carrying out the tests has a big impact on how adequate they are at catching the defects? What about the number of test cases? Okay. Does that really give us a good measure of coverage? One of the things that I find when I review tests that people have developed is that it's very common that a number of the tests that people spend time developing are redundant tests, or they lack sensitivity. They're really not effective. So if your testers are spending a lot of time creating a lot of tests that frankly are not going to find anything because they're redundant or because they lack sensitivity, then you shouldn't be surprised if you're not getting the types of results that you want. Oh, and are we in fact doing things like performance testing and security testing and configuration testing? Okay. Are we testing maintenance changes? Or if changes have to be distributed, are we testing the distribution and installation processes? Capers-Jones, a big software measurement guru, estimates that about 25% of documentation does not match the code. Sometimes the documentation is right, sometimes the code is right, sometimes neither is right. Okay. And do people have suitable training, and is the code suitably usable? Okay. Are these manual or automated tests scripted or exploratory? People sometimes just arbitrarily assume that exploratory tests are superior to others. Okay, that's not necessarily something that the objective measurements might back up. And are these unit tests or integration tests or behavior driven or test first and so forth? So these are all types of qualifiers that need to be part of our measurement to help us understand what is producing our results, because that becomes the basis then for understanding how to improve. So hopefully you've gotten some ideas about how your real testing process determines both the efficiency and effectiveness of your testing, and that your real process is part of your real testing process, is part of your real development process, and that your process determines how you do projects, and you measure processes by measuring common elements across projects. So if every project turns out to look like a duck and quack like a duck and so forth, it's probably a duck. And then we've mentioned a whole bunch of potential measures, especially both result measures, but especially causal measures. And part of your challenge is zeroing in on what goes on in your testing process to help narrow down and say which are the ones that seem most important for us at this time, and realize that that can change. So hopefully this has been understandable. If you've got questions, please put them into the questions box. Hopefully Maggie will be back from his LinkedIn challenges to share with us any
I am
questions.
back. It's very interesting. Only three people say because they have not received their link. Of course, email goes to spam folders now all the time. So if any one of you guys who are attending with us today have the time, you can go to the chat on the LinkedIn and just testify that you in fact received your email to join, and in fact you joined the webinar.
Okay.
But now I'm looking here. There is no questions in the questions tab from the live audience.
Okay. Well, I'll point out that next Thursday I'll be doing the fourth of these webinars on estimating test time and effort. And remembering that this is a preview for test process measurement and improvement, okay, which is live online Wednesday, September 29th, and part of the CSTL certification courses. So we'll give another minute or two. If anybody has any questions or comments, please share, and we'll do our best to answer those. And if not, we thank you for your participation. We hope to see you in next week's webinar and some or all of these courses. And remember, we can come to you, work directly with you and your colleagues, whether it's in training or working directly in a consulting and arrangement, working on your testing projects or mentoring, coaching. So we've got a lot of ways to work with you and help you with this. And hopefully you found this useful. Any other questions or comments, please put them into the questions box, and then we'll, if none, we'll finish up. Got anything there, Magdi?
In the meantime, let me emphasize again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted at the IIST website early next week. And if you're attending with us today, then you should also receive an email with the link to listen to the recorded webinar. And also, as we always say, you can always share this link to the recorded webinar to anyone in your team or your company to listen to it as well. We would like to have as many people as possible listening to those free webinars, because we truly believe that they are good educational webinars that people can benefit from. So if you have limited training budget, this is the way you get some free training.
Right. And that link to the recording will undoubtedly also be posted on LinkedIn.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course. Robin, I got a question from someone. Says, is there a link to those 4 courses or an easy way to get to them? Wow, this is probably our own problem here. So,
well, let me point out that if you want to register for any of these courses, the link is at the top here. Okay. That's to register for any of these live online courses. But while you are there, you could also look for the recorded courses if that's more to your interest.
oh, perhaps the question was about the 4 recorded webinars.
Yeah. So
the recorded
webinars
You should simply go to the testinginstitute.com and click on free training, and you'll get to the page of recorded webinars. You'll see all the webinars.
Okay, and that link will be posted in your reply to you and on LinkedIn.
Good. All right. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. You will receive a follow-up message or email from an hour from now with some survey questions, very short survey, about 10 questions. We ask you please a favor to take a few minutes to fill out the survey questions. It always goes out 1 hour after the webinar. And as I said, you should be receiving another email early next week with the link to the recorded webinar. Thanks to everyone again. Robin, I want to thank you so much, sir, for your time and for being willing to share your experience with us all the time. It's very valuable to have you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.